What really happened with your host, Mike Rivero. The history the government hopes you never learn. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It's Monday, January 9th, 2017, 11 days till the inauguration, start of a brand new week. We have got a lot of stuff to talk about today. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443, 800-313-9443. Mike is in our control room, twiddling the dials, keeping us out of trouble, ready to answer the phone when you call on in. And before I begin on the news here, a little personal anecdote I wanted to share. Over this weekend, we had some family come on in from the mainland. So Friday after the show, went down to Waikiki to meet them. And on the way, we stopped at Ala Moana to buy my wife some new shoes, which she was desperately in need of. And the manager of the shoe store we stopped at recognized me, got all excited, ran on over, whipped out his cell phone, and called his mother on the mainland, who apparently is also a big fan of the show here. So we had a little bit of a chit-chat. And so, Pam, if you're listening, it really was me. Your son wasn't playing a dirty trick on you. And that really was Claire at the same time. Now, getting on to the serious news here, Julian Assange is just now making a presentation about what's going on with this Russia hacking nonsense. But virtually everybody who has looked at this story is basically saying there is no evidence it took place. And the story from the government and the intelligence agencies has now mutated into one of, well, we don't know that they actually did it, but they could have. Now we're dealing in possibilities. We're being told we need to make stink face at Russia, possibly risk a nuclear war over the fact that Russia maybe kind of could sort of do these things at some point in the future. We've got the Department of Energy is already out there saying how America's entire power grid is vulnerable to cyber attack. And no, it is not, for a very simple reason. The computers that run critical infrastructure, like power stations, nuclear reactors, hydroelectric dams, and so forth, are not connected to the general internet. They're air-gapped for precisely that reason, not letting people get in there. Forget what you see in movies about, oh, I'm going to hack into the power station and do this and that. Doesn't really happen. When the U.S. and Israel planted Stuxnet on Iran's uranium centrifuges to wreck them, it had to be carried in on a flash drive. So now it's all about possibilities, possibilities, possibilities here. And the reality is that for all the talk about what's going on with hacking and all the rest of it, it's not like Hillary's people were really being all that concerned about security anyway. And apparently, John Podesta is now saying the FBI didn't even contact him about potential hacking until after WikiLeaks began publishing his emails by the thousands on October 7th. By the way, Podesta's password was password. Ooh, that's not security. That's a red carpet. That's a come on in and have fun sign. And the story here right now is that when the FBI became aware of the possibility of a hack, they went to the DNC, said, let us do a forensic study on your server to find out who broke in there. The DNC and Hillary's campaign said, no, we have a report prepared by an outside contractor. You can take that. And this outside contractor is the same one who wrote this original article, Russia's hacking this, Russia's hacking that. One of their top officials is a member of the Atlantic Council that has a political agenda of confrontation with Russia. But if there's no forensic analysis of the servers, if the NSA didn't catch any traffic coming through the fiber cables from Russia, then there is no evidence it actually happened. Russia hacking is just the 2017 version of Saddam has nuclear weapons. Now, Priebus, who is going to be the White House Chief of Staff, came out with a comment which immediately drew much ridicule on social media. Maybe this is Priebus payback. Now, when Trump appointed Priebus to be White House Chief of Staff, that was Trump's way of extending an olive branch to the GOP establishment, because he's going to need them when he runs for re-election. And Priebus just tried to throw him under the bus, saying that, oh yes, Trump understands Russia helped him win the election. There's no question about that. And social media went wild saying, what are you doing? Now, once again, Craig Murray, a former UK diplomat and whistleblower, has done yet another interview saying this was an inside leak of the Clinton campaign and Podesta emails. It was not from Russia, and Murray was part of the pipeline. He was handed the flash drive by somebody who has not been publicly identified. Could be Seth Rich. Could have been Eric Braverman. We know Seth Rich is dead, shot dead near his home, claimed to be a robbery, except that he still had his wallet, his watch, and his cell phone. Or it could be Eric Braverman, the former CEO of the Clinton Foundation, who has not been seen for months now. And we're hearing all this whining and crying going on. Why don't the people believe us? We're going to take a second here to do a shout-out to our honor affiliates who are just now rejoining our network here. And the reality is that public confidence and trust in the corporate media and the government has cratered. John Harwood did an online poll. Who do you believe about Russian hacking? WikiLeaks or the intelligence agencies? The final numbers, WikiLeaks 83%, intelligence agencies 17%. It got even worse when Lou Dobbs put up his poll. Who do you believe over the Russia hacking? Julian Assange or Barack Obama? Barack Obama got just 6%. Julian Assange, 94%. So we're hearing the Obama administration and General Haywood is out there, these people, they must believe us because we're the government. You have to believe us because we're the government. No, we don't, as a matter of fact. Nowhere in the Constitution does it say that we, the people, are under any obligation to believe a government that has been caught lying to us time after time after time after time. They're thrashing around. Public trust and faith in the government and corporate media has collapsed. There's nothing they can do to bring it back, and I have no sympathy for them. They did it to themselves. Now, Trump is out there basically saying only stupid people or fools would want a war with Russia. So, of course, John McCain is out there screaming, we must have war with Russia. We've got to have a war with Russia. War is good. War is going to be a lot of fun, I'm not going to fight in it. Nobody I know is going to fight in it. Your kids are going to go die in it. That's what your kids are for. Now, last night was the Golden Globe Awards, and there was, for those of you who didn't bother tuning in, and I'll admit I was one of them. I don't watch award shows unless I'm a nominee myself. And apparently all of these liberal, whining, snowflake, buttercup crybabies took their opportunity to bash Donald Trump. Meryl Streep got a Lifetime Achievement Award and just ranted against the immigration policies and falsely accused him of mocking a disabled reporter. It didn't actually happen. And there is a video that puts it on out there where Donald Trump did not make fun of a disabled reporter. And you need to watch that video to understand just how the corporate media continues to just pick at little tiny things and twist and distort them to go after Donald Trump. Now, Kellyanne Conway came on out and said, if Meryl Streep is so concerned about the treatment of disabled people, why did she not comment on those 4 black teenagers torturing a white disabled boy for more than a day, almost 2 days, on Facebook Live? Doesn't that connect? And Stefan Molyneux actually came out with the exact same comment saying, apparently in Hollywood, mocking a reporter's disability, which didn't actually happen, is much, much worse than for people torturing a special needs adult for nearly 2 days. Piers Morgan came on out and said, sorry, Merle, but that hypocritical anti-Trump rant was the worst performance of your career, apart from that time you gave a child rapist a standing ovation, referring to Meryl Streep's applause for Roman Polanski, who got Best Director for The Pianist. Merle was up there going, oh, yes, go get him. And, of course, the reason Roman Polanski is not in the United States anymore and will not come back to the United States is there's a warrant out for him for statutory rape. Now, Rosie O'Donnell is still out there foaming and frothing at the mouth, calling for Donald Trump's immediate arrest. For what? She doesn't say. Just arrest him, delay the inauguration. We've got to stop this. Somebody made a humorous video about how we're going to care for all these snowflakes who are traumatized by the fact the world isn't what they wanted it to be. It's amazing. Michael Moore is out there calling for 100 days of resistance against the Trump presidency. I think this is skirting dangerously close to fomenting revolution. It's a good thing for Michael Moore the Sedition Act is no longer being enforced. And Camille Paglia came on out with a good observation that applies to the Golden Globes, that it's time for celebrities to relearn how to age gracefully and fade away. Now, all those Hollywood liberals who are staring a career decline in the face because they backed Hillary, not that I think Trump is really going to care one way or the other, but politics in Hollywood, you're either in with the ins or you're out with the outs. And so this group of liberal Hollywood celebrities are calling for a massive all-around Hollywood strike until Donald Trump resigns. And they're not talking about just actors, they're talking about everybody involved in making motion pictures, actors, celebrities, prop companies, visual effects companies, the movie memorabilia souvenir stores. They want to deny us the blessings of their work, such as Batman versus Superman, Independence Day, Resurgence, Suicide Squad. Don't know how we could live without seeing that stuff coming out of Hollywood. But that's the threat. Get Donald Trump out or you'll never see another Suicide Squad. Anyway. Now that I think about it, that strike might actually improve our culture. Maybe it's a good idea. Go ahead. Go ahead, Hollywood. Go completely on strike. Now, believe it or not, the top fashion designers in this country are still in a snit over Trump's victory. Now, a lot of the top designers, like like Zac Posen, Diane von Furstenberg, Dolce & Gabbana, Michael America, Tommy Hilfiger, they're all trying to get the contract to keep Melania Trump dressed during Trump's term in office. And it's not just the honor of being the dressmaker to the First Lady. They know the photos of what is the hottest First Lady in U.S. history wearing their clothes is going to be good for business. But we still have all these other designers who were making these horrible creations for Michelle Obama, and they're out there saying, well, Melania Trump isn't good enough for our stuff. And looking at some of their creations they put on Michelle Obama, I think Melania is well advised to steer clear of them anyway. Apparently, Jim McGovern has been in Congress since 1996. He represents Massachusetts' 2nd District. And he's out there saying it's time for Mr. Trump's Twitter sideshow to come to an end. He's unfit to be president. They're still frothing at the mouth. And they're especially angry over the fact that Donald Trump wants to communicate directly with the American people through social media. Twitter, Facebook, independent media. He's completely bypassing the corporate media because of the way they treated him during the campaign and continue to treat him to this very day. And everybody in the U.S. aristocracy is in a panic that Donald Trump might actually be serious about not wanting to go to war with Russia and China. Horror of horrors. Now, Alex Jones is running a story right now responding to the Department of Homeland Security, basically saying we're going to federalize the election process, which I think would be a good idea to federalize and unify it to nationwide standards everybody understands. I just don't trust the Department of Homeland Security to be in charge of that. And Alex Jones is saying there may yet be a last-ditch attempt by Obama and the Department of Homeland Security to declare this last election null and void and say we'll have a new election for president, maybe 2 or 3 years down the road. And I know it sounds outlandish, and it sounds a lot like all these other harebrained schemes to deny Trump the White House, from the Black Lives Matter rioting, threats against the electors, an attempt to block the congressional acceptance of the electoral vote, and on and on and on and on. And it may not be any more than that either. But our current entrenched establishment is absolutely panicked. They're desperate. They're in a corner, and nothing is more dangerous than a cornered animal. They see all of that accumulated wealth and power and privilege and comfort and luxury evaporating, just pouring through their fingers. And they understand, with Donald Trump in the White House and the independent media ascendant, history is not going to look back on their track record with kindness. That's why he's complaining about Twitter. They've lost control of the national history. Now, backpacks and drones are being banned from Trump's inauguration out of fears of an ISIS attack. I think it's a good idea to ban the backpacks and drones. I don't think ISIS is the worry. I think it's the Hillary-lites. I think it's the representatives from the military-industrial complex. The biggest threat to Donald Trump is from the U.S. government, as it was in the case of John F. Kennedy, Robert F. Kennedy, Ted Kennedy, George Wallace, and so forth. Now, the corporate media on this issue of this horrible event that took place in Chicago, these 4 black teenagers kidnapped, tortured a mentally disabled white kid for almost 2 days. And the corporate media is still out there trying to say, this wasn't really a big deal. You know, come on. I mean, this sort of stuff happens all the time in Chicago, apparently. Because the narrative is always that the only one who can be a victim of a hate crime in this country has to be black or gay or Jewish. A white guy, by default, can't be a victim of a hate crime. The orthodox view of the corporate media, black people don't commit hate crimes. You're being ridiculous here. Dr. Drew actually came on out saying he feels sorry for the Facebook Live torturers, for the kids who did the torture. Doesn't feel sorry for the victim. He feels sorry for the torturers. Says, we failed them. No, you made them. During this entire 2016 election season, there was a deliberate campaign to fan up racial tension to help the Hillary Clinton campaign, and this is the end result. If you hadn't been playing these games, these divide and conquer games, we might not have seen this. What they really regret protecting is that propaganda that the blacks are good and the whites are bad, and, you know, whites commit hate crimes and blacks are always the victims. There's a recording from CBS Radio. It's on the front page of whatreallyhappened.com, in which CBS News implies the Facebook Live torturers were white and the victim is black. That is how hard they're pushing this. The radio show describes the torturers as shouting the N-word at the victim, while the torturers were always screaming about Donald Trump, and they don't go beyond that. So you're left to think, okay, the torturers are Donald Trump fans, and they were torturing a black guy. This is completely opposite what happened. And to nobody's surprise, story coming out of Investment Watch Blog, we're starting to see the corporate media, along with the government itself, say, forget what you see, forget what you hear, you have to believe what we tell you. If you are a loyal American citizen, you will believe the bovine excrement. We'll be right back. Hello, hi, America. Welcome back to our show here, and we're talking about the war between the real media and the independent media. That's their labels, by the way. And that CBS recording really lays it out. They literally wrote that news piece to imply, they didn't say, but they implied the torturers were white and the victim was black. And by the way, as a side note, somebody launched a GoFundMe campaign for that mentally disabled kid who was tortured by these 4 black kids. And they've already raised over $100,000 for him, which is not adequate compensation. Now, the judge in this case is refusing to allow bail for these torture suspects. And already the black community is out there saying, oh, well, they're disadvantaged. We failed them. They're a product of society. Trying to get them out. And it is rather amazing there. Another similar case here. Florida homeowner defends herself by fatally shooting the burglar trying to rob the house. The burglar's family is now on the attack against the homeowner, literally saying, how was he supposed to get money to buy clothes? I mean, seriously, that's the attitude. That white people are just there to be preyed upon. All right, we're going to take a phone call. Dustin in New Jersey. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, hi, Mike. I want to talk about Hollywood and Russia, but on the 4 black adults that beat up and tortured the white disabled kid. It's amazing how the media, all these people, and even the police department over there were basically saying these young people, they try to make them like more normal looking, like victims, like they're victims. They had bad home training. Like, these kids don't even go to school, probably,
Well, the girl who was the leader of this pack, if you will, was already on bail awaiting trial for shoplifting. These are not good kids. And maybe, yes, they're a product of their environment, which tells us that our environment is seriously screwed up after decades of liberal agenda.
And moving on to Hollywood, but they can all go on strike because I got a very large collection of VHS and Laserdisc and DVDs, and I find I'm watching them more than any of the newer stuff anymore.
Well, that's why I put up that Time magazine article on the 10 worst films of 2016, and I've been saying all along, part of the price that Hollywood has paid for going along with the political agenda, kicking out people who were free-thinking, who weren't going along like sheep, is they inadvertently at the same time kicked out their most creative talents. And the same thing happened back during the McCarthy era, where the blacklisting in Hollywood, anybody who refused to go along with the agenda to demonize communist Russia was thrown out of their career, and the quality of the product coming out of Hollywood noticeably suffered because of it, because those people who were thinking for themselves were also the most creative thinkers.
So you remember also, like, that flyover, the whole Midwest is a fly. I mean, I'm from New Jersey, but I mean, like they say, these people on the East and West Coast, most people live in a bubble of their own world. And the Hollywood and the media are even more of a bubble, minus the paid off, ones, but like they live in a bubble of their own world. They're gated communities. I mean, Meryl Streep, she has like a 90-acre home, like in California. I think she has a penthouse in Manhattan and another home. I mean, these people have their own security, their own chefs. They live in another world.
It's not even the living standards here. They're in a bubble of their own sense of self-importance. They are, after all, just play acting on film or video or computer, and they have an overdeveloped sense of their importance to the society. I mean, this idea of we're going to punish America by not making any more movies until Trump resigns, I think the reaction of most Americans is going to be, okay, fine, we'll let more films that are made in places that make good movies, like New Zealand, we'll let them into our theaters, or some of the stuff coming out of Europe is just amazing. Hollywood is no longer the center of global filmmaking, except in its own mind. And it really has been in decline for all this time. Anyway, Dustin, got to let you go. Got to take another break for commercials, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And I'm getting emails coming on in reminding me of the other recent offerings from Hollywood that would lead us to cheer. A complete, total strike of Hollywood filmmaking. The remake of Ben-Hur was definitely up there. And the feminized Ghostbusters, which was an absolute epic fail. So we're going to go back to the phones here. George in Texas, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, happy belated New Year, Mike.
Happy belated New Year to you as well.
Anyway, I was sitting here thinking about, Obama teaming up with Homeland Security to a way to overturn election. Well, there's a problem with that if they try that. Well, number one, Barack Obama threw the law enforcement underneath the bus with Black Lives Matter and Fergus and all that. Number two, there's a lot of people in the intelligence agency that are really sick and tired of the reckless handling of intelligence information, especially with Hillary Clinton. And number three, the military ain't behind him. So he's really burned his bridges with the key critical elements of a coup d'etat, because I don't really think they'll go along with it.
Well, we could be dealing with a president who is coming close to the end of his presidency, who is mentally deteriorating the way Adolf Hitler did toward the close of the war, when he was flat out delusional, thought he had armies that didn't exist, and was surrounded by a bunch of people who dared not contradict him. And we may be seeing the same thing here. Oh, yes, Mr. President, this will actually work, and blah, blah, blah. And none of them have. I'm sure somebody somewhere was convinced riots in the street after the election were going to reverse the Electoral College. Then there were the direct threats against the Electoral College. Then there was the challenge to the electors themselves when Congress received the electoral vote. Whoever got these things going was absolutely convinced by themselves and their own advisors that these things were actually stood a chance of working.
Well, another thing, they're all talking about this really deep divide in this country. Well, there's really a severe split in the African American community. I'm really starting to see a lot of Black Americans start to stand up for what is good and starting to denounce this thuggish behavior and this culture they live in. They want to turn things around. And I see a real fracture in the Black community.
No, I'm starting to see that as well, and that's a very, very good thing to have happen. It's not a recent phenomenon. I mean, back during the days of affirmative action, when the government decided that proving equality of opportunity was too difficult and they would just mandate equality of outcome, there were a lot of Black people who had become successful on their own terms, on their own skill, talent, and hard work, and they didn't like this affirmative action because it basically said everybody was assuming, oh, you're an executive of the company because of affirmative action. And it undermined the real achievement of these individuals, and a lot of them spoke up then. And the same thing today. There are a lot of really great people in this country who don't like being associated with these manufactured extremists, whether they're black, white, pink, green, peach, taupe, or mauve, or plaid, for that matter, and they don't like being associated with them. And we're seeing constantly where all these law-abiding, very decent Muslims are standing up and saying, don't conflate us with these wacko terrorists. We have all these law-abiding gun owners standing up saying we're tired of being equated with these kids whose brains are melted on prescription antidepressants. And it's time to just take people on an individual basis and stop all this, because the manufacturing of these thuggish groups is part of that whole propaganda effort. And as I said, what happened in Chicago with these 4 black kids, you're right, they're adults, they were over 18. These 4 black people torturing this mentally retarded white kid for close to 2 days is the end result of an entire campaign year that was screaming black lives were important, white lives are not important, whites are the cause of all the problems in the black community, and this is the end result.
Well, the thing, with Black Lives Matter, I would like to see Black Lives Matter go in front of Planned Parenthood to protest the murdering of half of the black babies in the abortion mill. So you won't see that happen.
Well,
if you saw 4 actual Trump supporters torture a black special needs person, I'll tell you one thing, the media would be in a firestorm. Boy, it'd be like blood in the water with sharks.
Yeah, because they're still pushing their agenda. They're pushing the liberal agenda, and they still think, despite the numbers to the contrary, they still think the vast majority of the American people are paying attention to what they're saying and will form their decisions on the basis of what these highly paid prostitutes and correspondents are telling them to think. But the polls are showing those days are pretty much over. If there's one thing that we in the independent media can point to as a success, as a victory, at this time in history, it is that we have removed from the corporate media and the government the ability to lie to the public with impunity. And without that, they're stuck because they have been controlling this country, controlling the American people with lies, fraud, and deception for so long, they don't know any other way. They don't know how to actually come forward and present a convincing, structured, rational argument that we should be doing X, Y, Z. It's always Hegelian dialectic, and everybody's now on to that trick.
Well, it's just like a husband that beats his wife and lies to her and cheats on her, and he's trying to say, you got to believe me, you got to trust me, and she's not buying it. So that's what it looks like.
That's a very good analogy, because very often when there is an abusive individual against a spouse or a child, the message is, you deserve this. You're the bad person. You deserve this. You're making me do this to you. And they'll go along with it for a while, and then all of a sudden there's that great awakening. No, wait a minute. I'm not the bad person here. The person abusing me is. And now we've got 300 million Americans who are going through that experience saying, no, I'm not the problem here. The government that is abusing me is the problem.
Well, thank you, Mike. Have a good day.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go here. Getting on back to the establishment media versus the independent media, basically saying there's an article that came out of The Guardian. Moral panic over fake news hides the real enemy, the digital giants. Basically saying that the news that cannot be relied upon, the news that always turns out to be based on lies, fraud, and deception, isn't coming from the independent media. It's coming from the government, parroted by the corporate media, who have, at least for the moment, the advantage in terms of bandwidth and outlets and guaranteed access to your TVs through the cable company. But that advantage is not holding up, and that's why they're in a panic. Now, here's a bizarre article, came out of shtfplan.com, where Obama is now out there expressing his concern that Americans trust Vladimir Putin more than they trust the U.S. government, and they do by quite a wide margin. And Obama's out there saying, we can't have this. Putin's not on our team. We can't let the American people trust him. People are waking up. People are not buying the lies. And we're seeing the entire government and corporate media taking the position that we are somehow obligated to take their word for whatever's going on, despite what we see with our own eyes, hear with our own ears, our own senses, our own thoughts and analysis. They want us to surrender that and just say, you just rely on us and we'll keep things going here. Well, again, let's look at human-caused global warming. We're already seeing another record-setting winter descend upon the northern hemisphere, and they're still out there saying, oh, the Arctic is just on fire. Really, it's global warming. You've got to pay carbon. They're raising on a busted flush, and then they wonder why we won't trust them. And I was rather pleased to see, I made up a couple of graphics on this idea that Russian hacking is the 2017 equivalent of Saddam has nuclear weapons. And I posted it to social media. It's all over the place, and I encourage you to do the same thing. If you make that point, it cuts through all the denial that is going to be in that tiny, tiny percentage of people who are still buying the official story. Just say, Russia hacking is the current version of Saddam's nukes. There was no proof in either one. It was just an excuse to go to war. People plug into that. Even people who are not disposed to think of the government automatically as liars. So what is the corporate media going to do? Well, they're going to go after the advertisers. They're going to try and drive the independent media out of business. The New York Slimes is out there urging a boycott of Breitbart. They're trying to get people to stop, to contact the advertisers at Breitbart and say, we're not going to be buying your products because you advertise on Breitbart. Remember what I said? The other side thinks it's their divine right to play dirty. And this is exactly what's going on here. So we need to boycott the New York Slimes. We need to boycott everybody who advertises in the New York Slimes. If it's okay for the New York Times to do it, it's okay for what really happened to do it. Sauce for the goose. And because of their overhead at the New York Slimes, I mean, they're already in trouble. They're much more vulnerable to an advertiser boycott than Breitbart is. So let's turn over to the war zones, emphasis on the plural because there's a lot going on over there. 2 more Syrian settlements have agreed to the Russia-Turkish-Syrian peace plan in the last 24 hours. So that is really starting to settle down here. The Syrian army is close to a complete liberation of Wadi Barada area near Damascus. Now, one of the reasons that Assad is making such great gains is they've offered an amnesty program, which is, if you've been fighting for the U.S., just surrender your weapons and promise you won't do anything bad anymore and you can go home. And Assad has been keeping his word, and he's saying the vast majority of these combatants are declared as rehabilitated, and it's okay for them to go back to their homes and their families and their businesses. So it's all coming apart. Well, if we're losing Syria, what are we going to do? Well, let's start a war with Iran. And once again, we're seeing a story about how a U.S. warship has fired 3 shots at rapidly approaching Iran vessels. Now, these are coastal patrol boats. They're basically oversized, modified ski boats. They don't really represent a threat to a fully armed U.S. warship. But the U.S. is trying to provoke. And we've seen these in the past where they were threatening us, and then we find out the picture of the boat was shot with a telephoto lens. They were never really that close. And it is their coastal waters. They have a right to be there and wonder what the U.S. is doing there. Now, if Iranian ships were tooling around the Gulf of Mexico, then you'd have a real issue. U.S. Marines, 300 Marines, are heading back to Afghanistan, to the Helmand province, because those gosh darn people of Afghanistan want to kick out their foreign puppet rulers. How dare they do that? Don't they know they're conquered? Don't they know they're supposed to stay conquered? Remember, Obama campaigned literally on ending all these wars and bringing the kids home. Didn't happen, did it? Now, the good news that came in over the weekend, Turkey has agreed to withdraw their unauthorized troops from Bashika in Iraq. That was a big sticking point between Iraq and Turkey's decided, okay, we're going to yank them out. We're going to calm things down here, and hopefully we're going to get Iraq cooperating with Turkey regarding this attempt by the U.S. to carve a new Kurdistan out of Iraq, Turkey, and Syria, which Iraq and Turkey and Syria were never all that hot and bothered for anyway. Now, up in Ukraine, things are getting very, very tense. According to an article that came out of FortRuss.com, the government in Ukraine is now basically transporting civilians to the front lines near the DPR in the hope that they will be killed, and photos of dead civilians can then be used to demonize the Donetsk People's Republic. They're literally busing these people out there to set them up to be bloody shirts, to wag. Meanwhile, the Pentagon is vowing more European war games to deter Russian aggression. Look at who's being aggressive. Poland has launched a huge military buildup aimed at Russia. The U.S. is sending thousands of tanks, thousands of soldiers, missile systems in there. The fact of the matter is, Europe is being invaded right now, this very second, but it's not by Russia. It's by the United States. We know who the real aggressors are here. McCain and Graham are still out there saying, we promise you'll have a war. We're going to make war on Putin and Russia. War is going to be fun. Well, okay, guys, here are your rifles. Here are your parachutes. Here are your day-glow orange jumpsuits left over from the CIA torture centers. Watch your heads climbing into that transport. Have fun. Send pictures. We'll call Putin and tell him you two are on your way to kick his butt all by yourselves here. There has been another strange death involving a Russian diplomat. The Russian counselor to Athens, that's basically one step below the ambassador themselves, has been found dead, and all they're saying is he was killed by abnormal causes. So we're seeing a lot of wet work being directed against Russian diplomats, and again, it's an attempt to provoke Putin into doing something that can be seized on by the corporate media as justifying military action. Meanwhile, down in the Central African Republic, apparently some of the UN peacekeepers were caught molesting little children. I guess they couldn't get into the seminary. And a panel of French judges decided it's not worth bringing charges. If you're a child in a war zone, you just got to sort of accept and, understand these things are going to happen. Meanwhile, a group of Russian warships have paid a courtesy call in Manila, and President Rodrigo Duterte toured a Russian warship and encouraged the Russian Navy to visit much more often. Now, Obama destroyed U.S. relations with the Philippines for daring to tell Duterte to go easy on drug criminals. And now Russia is stepping into that gap. Well done, Obama. We're going to make sure that that's a big part of your historical legacy. How in order to protect drug criminals, you lost our relationship with the Philippines and handed Russia a power projection point in the Pacific. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. Now, before the U.S.-sponsored coup d'etat in Kiev, Ukraine had a functioning government. They are all now in exile. And according to former Ukrainian Prime Minister Nikolai Azarov, they are forming a government in exile and starting diplomatic overtures to other countries to be recognized as a government in exile. And of course, the United States government is going to try and oppose this because in their view, any government installed by the United States is the legitimate government and the only government of our conquered provinces. So that's going to get very interesting. Let's talk about the economic news. Things are very dicey, and again, it's looking like there isn't anything Donald Trump's going to be able to do to stop this mess from falling apart. China is threatening a near-term U.S. Treasury short squeeze. Now, it's not that China wants to harm the U.S. because we still represent a major part of their export business, not as much as before. For 2008, it was a huge business. The problem is that China is dealing with its own buildup of debt problems, and they're having to liquidate U.S. treasuries to cover that. And the reason this is difficult is because there are way too many treasury bonds out there. There's a treasury bond bubble that has been created by the U.S. government. And it's hard to see how they're going to deal with this absent a complete jubilee on all debt around the world all at once and the banning of private central banking globally. The pound fell against 56 world currencies in 2016. And again, not as much manufacturing, not as much agriculture. Eric Townsend is sounding the warning that the stronger U.S. dollar may require global central bankers to reset the financial system. So they're already out there talking about, okay, this whole debt thing is all imaginary anyway. We're just going to zero it out. But that would still leave the private central banks in control. And I don't think that's a permanent solution. Because they're just going to start the same scams all over again. And our great-grandchildren will be in the same mess we are in now until private central banking as an institution is banned. Now, India decided to institute a universal basic income, partly in response to the Washington, D.C. inspired push to ban cash and to seize gold. and they're in serious trouble over there. Finland is now getting ready to try a universal basic income that is also tangled up with the plans to ban cash. We've got to take a break for station identification. We'll be right back. Hello, hi, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 2, and the phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. We're talking about the economic news, and we are seeing more and more articles talking about the retail apocalypse. Sears, Macy's, the Limited are all closing stores, and they're putting part of the blame on the availability of online shopping, which is certainly true. But the rest of it just comes down to the reality: the ordinary American citizen, worker, does not have the disposable income they had prior to 2008. Most of the jobs that we saw running up the job numbers in the official unemployment report were service sector's job. Most of them were seasonal. They're being let go now. Macy's is now talking about closing 100 of their stores. And I mentioned before, when we have a Macy's down here at the bottom of the hill, and the quality of the merchandise has been very obviously in decline. They're going with the least expensive stuff they can find, and it also didn't hurt when they came on out dissing Donald Trump here. But the bottom line is, there's little productivity growth in the Western world. Everyone's thrashing around trying to grab what remains of the currency. It whizzes past them. And we're starting to hear talk about investment in new factories in the United States of America. But by and large, industrial and even agricultural development is centered on Russia, China, Central Asia. What we have here in Wall Street are a bunch of executives just throwing their hands up and saying, why aren't people just giving us their money? Just like we have the government and corporate media saying, why aren't people just believing us? Fool me once, so forth and so on. Now, Jack Ma has had a meeting with Donald Trump about creating 1 million U.S. jobs over the next 5 years, which sounds really very impressive. Unfortunately, and my apologies to Donald Trump, I'm still glad that you won the election, but not to rain or, in maybe this case, snow on your inauguration. 1 million jobs is a drop in the bucket when you remember there are 95 million Americans willing and able to work who have not been able to find jobs for years. Now, maybe what is needed is a new infrastructure investment program. Get people out there repairing the roads, repairing the rails, repairing the dams before they start collapsing. Will it result in more debt? It has to, unavoidable. Unless we close that private central bank and the government issues its own currency again, which is the way this country was started. Fiat is going to invest $1 billion in new auto plants in Michigan and Ohio. That'll create 2,000 jobs right there. And all Trump had to do was threaten a border tax for products brought in to make it financially attractive to build the factories here to serve the American auto market. Unfortunately, Americans don't have money to buy cars, so that may stutter. Basically, at this point, we need to reverse what happened in 2008. In 2008, when the mortgage-backed security fraud collapsed, the U.S. government solution was to take trillions of dollars away from the American people and give it to the banks so the banks could loan it back to the American people at interest. Sweet deal for the banks, lousy deal for the American people. We need to reverse that. We need to go to every single Wall Street financial firm that has been caught in fraud, whether it's the mortgage-backed security fraud, LIBOR rigging, silver rigging, gold rigging, anything, and just say, we're going to take your money away because it's proceeds from criminal activity anyway, and we're going to give it to the American people so the American people can start buying products again. The American people can start small businesses again, which accounts for 60% of new job creation in a healthy economy. The money is all concentrated up at the top. It's got to be brought back down to the bottom to save the economy, and it may take some draconian messages measures to do that. We're going to take a phone call. James in Charlotte, North Carolina. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind? James?
Yeah. Hi, Mike. Hello. Since this is the first time I've talked to you in the new year, I wish you a happy and prosperous year to come.
Thank you.
Yes, I've been over the last couple of days, been trying to familiar myself with the latest, what's going on in this Operation Atlantic Resolve, and there's looks like some really strange and ominous things going on. One thing I found out is that with this upscaling of the presence in Eastern Europe, there have been several requests by the Russian military for the Air Force to make sure that they're using transponders on all their flights, but that has been rejected. Now, if that's not asking for trouble, I don't know what is.
Yeah, that's
familiar with that.
Yeah, I'm very familiar with that, and that is an issue. If you're supposed to be cooperating with each other, you've got to be able to identify each other's aircraft, and it's not just the normal air traffic transponders. The U.S. weapons have a system called IFF, Identification Friend or Foe. Have you ever seen a Stinger missile? It's got that big boxy antenna on the front. That's what that does. It sends a signal to whatever aircraft you're aiming the Stinger at, and if the aircraft responds, I'm a friend, the Stinger will not fire. And if you're not running that transponder, then you're going to get friendly fire shoot down, which happens a lot more often than most Americans are aware.
Right, yeah. Well, the situation, I mean, it looks to me like if they're going to be flying blind, so to speak, they're asking for the possibility of either an actual shoot down of one of their aircraft by Russian defenses, or or a friendly fire down, which they can,
they can blame it on. They can blame it on Russia. So we're looking at one of two possible agendas. One is to sacrifice an American pilot and an aircraft and say Russia has attacked us. Russia has attacked us. Or, and this is probably the more reasonable situation, those U.S. aircraft are going places that they're not supposed to be. And that's why they're turning off all their transponders so they can be seen on a skin paint but not identified, because we're still getting reports about how U.S. Air Forces are not bombing ISIS and Al-Qaeda. They're not bombing the ISIS oil facilities. They keep hitting hospitals and schools and pipelines and civilians. And obviously, you don't want your transponder on when you're doing things like that.
Yeah. Just one more thing. If you look at a map of the deployment of forces, it looks almost identical. I mean, we've got right now from the Bosporus to the Gulf of Finland, and it looks just like the German deployment of the Wehrmacht prior to Operation Barbarossa.
Yes.
The World War II. It looks almost identical.
Yeah, they're massing for war. They're massing for war. All they need is some way to make it look like this is Russia's fault and Russia deserves it. And that's why I'm expecting there's going to be a false flag. They're going to black out the U.S. power grid, or they'll simply shut down the Internet, which solves that problem of the pesky independent media. But they've only got 11 days to get this thing cranked up, because after 11 days, with Trump in the White House, you know, the war party is over.
My stomach's tied up in knots. So
yeah, mine too. So is Claire. We're kind of in a situation like small children. When you're a small child, you believe your parents are perfect, because if they're not perfect, then your own security feels threatened. And so children always believe their parents are great. During the process of growing up, they realize that's not really the case. The parents are just bigger kids with their own money. But the American people are predisposed to believe the government knows what they're doing, that these individuals in Congress and the White House really do represent the best minds of the nation, because to have any other view of them makes people, as you say, your stomach's churning, and people are very, very nervous. But it's time to wake up to that reality, because simply pretending that people in Washington, D.C. know what's right and know what they're doing, that's going to put us on the path to disaster. Ultimately, the power in this country is we the people, with it, the responsibility. If our government is behaving badly, we the people have to stand up and do something about it. At the very least, point to the government and say, you guys are nuts, and we're not going to listen to you anymore.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we can do that and hope for the best. Hope we can make it through Inauguration Day.
Only 11 days to go. I got the countdown timer running and everything.
Right down to the second, huh?
Yeah. As soon as he says, I do, or I swear, that's it. The party begins.
Yeah. Okay. Well, good talking with you.
All right. Thanks an awful lot here. We're going to take a moment to do a shout-out to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. And we're going to go on the phones to Jerry in Chicago. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Michael. Thanks a lot for taking my call. In this last 10 minutes, you just mentioned something about our infrastructure. And I remember seeing a show on the Discovery Channel about 10, 11 years ago, and it talked about our infrastructure, and I believe there were 15 points involved, and our infrastructure got a D- as an average grade. Now, that was 10, 11 years ago. What is it now, an F?
Probably there hasn't been significant investment in restoring and rebuilding or replacing our infrastructure. And a lot of people don't understand when you're talking about that. That's an important issue, because the infrastructure exists to support life, to support commerce. If you're going to be trucking goods across the nation, you have to have good, reliable roads and railroads. A big area where the infrastructure is a problem is that whole western irrigation system, which, because it's decayed and cracked and not being repaired, today it's only delivering 1/3 of the water that it did when it was brand new, and that means that you're dealing with previously fertile farmlands are reverting back to desert. And our infrastructure has been neglected, because we've been on a covert war economy for about 15 years now, and our infrastructure was not in good shape even back then. And it's just been allowed to rot away. That gave us the disasters with New Orleans flooding during Hurricane Katrina, because funding to reinforce and replace and repair the levees had been cut. Some of those levees had the dirt piled up, but they hadn't been tamped and waterproofed. And we're seeing that again. Same thing with the Deepwater Horizon. The manual blowout preventer on that was 4 years overdue for mandatory maintenance. And when you let this stuff slide, bad things start to happen. The nation stands or falls on the quality of our infrastructure.
Okay, Mike. Well, that's all I wanted to check in on, and you have a great day.
All right. Thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go here. Now, turning to immigration, the stories just keep getting worse and worse and worse. Apparently, over in Italy, a 31-year-old African migrant raped a 12-year-old girl. And apparently, there was a lot of stalling on this issue. They didn't realize that she was pregnant until she was in the 4th month of pregnancy, at which point she's past the point that she could legally get an abortion. So she had to carry the baby to term. This 12-year-old girl. Now, the baby's been put up for adoption, but still, what a horrible, horrible thing to do to a 12-year-old girl. To put her through pregnancy and childbirth, and then give up the child. So this cultural enrichment that we keep hearing about isn't really working out. But cultural enrichment was not the goal. The New World Order was, and a foundation necessary for the New World Order is for all the people of the world to be blurred together, to destroy any sense of a regional identity, cultural identity, historical identity, anything that gives you a sense of self that makes it more difficult to control you. And that's the reason why Soros has been spending so much of his money to flood Europe with refugees from the U.S. wars, refugees into the U.S., illegal immigrants coming across the border. They're trying to create a single common human population where everybody's sort of the same. And it's not working out. And George Soros is out there whining and crying after all the billions of dollars he has spent, and Donald Trump is just going to come along and spoil it all. Or if it isn't Donald Trump, it's just the people of planet Earth who don't share his vision and are getting in the way. And he's whining and crying about how liberal democracy is failing all across the Western world. Well, here's the problem with that, George. The model you're putting on out there is not, in fact, liberal democracy. It's not even democracy at all. It's a fascist economic dictatorship with trappings of a democracy like we currently have here in the United States of America. Except this last year, the American people realized the elections are fraudulent and generated a tsunami of support for Trump that overwhelmed the vote fraud mechanism. Maybe that's why Department of Homeland Security is taking over the elections, because by golly, when we rig the elections, they are going to stay rigged. Same thing happened with the Brexit vote, and they're trying to undo that. All of these leaders around the world who are elected talking about democracy this and democracy that and will of the people, that's not the agenda. In their mind, their attitude is, we tell you what to think and you will do what we tell you to do. And that's their idea of democracy. Now, the political correct movement is still going strong, and I'm hoping that's going to be something that we see start to unwind over the next 4 years, because frankly, it has gotten completely out of control. Over at the University of Wisconsin, La Crosse campus, they've got a hate response team, and they're responding to microaggressions. And some of the things that have been determined to be offensive in 2016 included wearing a crucifix, saying all lives matter, apparently Christmas vacations and golf outings are microaggressions because not everybody is a Christian, nor can everybody afford to go play golf. So asking somebody to go play golf, that's a microaggression. Apparently going out of your way to avoid meeting somebody who's being unpleasant is now considered a microaggression. Every time I meet this person, they scream in my face about anti-Semitism. I think I'm going to go the other way. According to Rutgers, that's a microaggression. I wonder if Rutgers would be offended if we avoided their campus entirely. Apparently, pro-life flyers are considered racist, according to Purdue University. Over at Ramapo, an America-themed barbecue was canceled for being offensive. Because Americanism, that's inherent racism. Doesn't matter that you're standing on the country, you're not supposed to do that. Over at Florida State University, Harambe costumes are cultural appropriation. You're not allowed to borrow that. Apparently, at the University of Southern California, the statement illegal immigrants was banned on final exams because it's dehumanizing. No, it isn't. It's a legal definition. Illegal immigrants. Illegal. That's it. It is a perfectly legitimate term to use. Apparently, the word holiday, along with evergreen trees, was too religious for the Texas Women's University. It was bad enough you can't say Merry Christmas. Now it couldn't even say Happy Holiday. It's just ridiculous here. Apparently, the American identity is the most blatant microaggression over at UVA. And these students only had to go into $75,000 in student loan debt to learn this. And I'm sure they're all going to find wonderful, high-paying jobs learning about all the things to feel bad about and be offended by. We'll be right back. Aloha America, welcome back to our show here. Now, as you know, part of the gun-grabbing agenda has been to declare that when some kid with his brain melted on prescription antidepressants goes on a rampage and kills some people, that it should be permissible to sue the gun dealer and the gun manufacturer for damages. And it's a bit of a reach. That's like saying that people have a right to sue the automakers when a drunk driver kills somebody on a crosswalk. That's how ridiculous that is. But apparently in Missouri, they've decided to take a step in the other direction. There's a bill under consideration that would make any business that declares itself a gun-free zone liable for any injuries suffered by customers on the premises when somebody who can't read the gun-free zone sign comes in with a gun and pulls the trigger. And I think that's perfectly fair. If you want to have a disarmed area and somebody comes in with a gun and shoots your customer, that customer should be able to sue the business owner for a violation of their Second Amendment right. And a lot of people are already looking back at that horrible incident in the Florida airport, saying, what a shame that none of those people were allowed to have a gun to shoot back at this guy with. Especially given that at one point this perpetrator had his guns taken away for his mental problems. And all of a sudden, just in time for him to get on the plane in Alaska, they say, here, you can have your gun back. Here's some ammo. Have fun. It's kind of weird stuff out there. All right, we're going to go ahead and grab ourselves a phone call from Kyle in Pennsylvania. Aloha, Kyle. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. I wanted to go back to the college professors and what's being taught at university today.
Yes.
So a story that has law students not being taught rape law because it can be considered offensive or upsetting to them.
Okay, what kind of law? Hang on, what kind of law they can't be taught?
Rape law.
Oh, okay.
Because it's considered upsetting to the students. How are you going to have lawyers who don't participate in a certain section of law, either prosecutors or defenders or public defenders? I don't understand where this sort of information is bad. Information is neither good or bad. It's simply information. The application of it is where any sort of nefarious ideology can come out of it, but information itself is not bad.
Well, I mean, you could carry that same ridiculous argument to many different areas of the law. You could say, well, we're gonna ban the teaching of immigration law because that leads to feelings of racism and rejection. Again, Claire keeps raising the issue. What happens when all these little buttercups in college who are hideously in debt for their college education and they get out into the real world, which isn't concerned if your feelings are wounded or not, and discover that because they lobbied in college for certain subjects to be off limit, they're not able to compete in the real world. And that's just a reality. There are some unpleasant realities in the real world. Illegal immigration, rape, corporate pillaging, Wall Street fraud. And anybody who's going to be a lawyer has to be prepared to deal with that and not just go in there and say, I don't want to talk about this law because it upsets me. Well, if you're that easy to upset, go into baking then as a career.
And the irony of it is that all of the most public offensive deeds are coming from college professors. The gentleman who harassed Ivanka Trump on the plane, college professor. The guy who said all he wants for Christmas is white genocide, college professor. All of these people, they don't practice what they're teaching. It is got to be considered some sort of mental degradation. I mean,
what it is simpler than that. Liberalism has taken over the university system in this country for a great many years, and now all of a sudden they're seeing that liberal agenda and the funding that comes with it is under threat. And all they can think about doing is behaving even more like liberals today than they did last week, which is where we're getting all this ridiculousness. Apparently, at a university in Great Britain, they're now going to ban the discussion of any white philosophers. Okay, I mean, that's how ridiculous this is. Anyway, listen, Kyle, got to let you go. Got to take a break for a phone call. Got another call waiting when we come back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. We're going to take another phone call from David in South Carolina. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Mike. Aloha.
Yes, you're on the air.
Okay, hey. Yes, I wanted to point out that before we invaded Afghanistan, the Taliban had all but subdued the civil war there and was wiping out the poppy crop, you know?
Yes.
We invade, you know, and I've noticed this over the years. People would stub their toe. Next thing you know, they're on a opioid, you know, or opoid, whatever you call it. And around here, at least, and up in, you know, the Appalachian Trail completely, it got so bad, and they established pain clinics and all this kind of thing. You know, everybody around here, you know, is hooked on these things. They get too expensive, or they mess up with their doctor. Next thing you know, they go to heroin, and I mean, it's an epidemic all over the place. It's a big racket, like most things in this country.
It is, and the pharmaceutical corporations and the doctors are pushing opiate painkillers by prescription with the intention of addicting their patients to them. And at this point, it's hard to find a moral line between the giant pharmaceutical corporations and the guy who's down there on the corner of the street.
Exactly, or the military-industrial complex that helped it in the first place.
I call it the medical-industrial complex.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and these kids are left and right. People are dying all over the place. We knew a guy who was doing really well. He had drank a lot, and he was doing really well. He wasn't drinking anymore. I hadn't seen him in a while. They found him up here in a parking lot with a needle in his arm, you know. And it's just, you know, people are dropping like flies, and there's an industry here. Then they'd lock people up, put them to work for pennies on the day, you know, and most of the production in America, yeah, I've heard at least, actually comes from prison labor. You know, I don't know if that's true or not, but...
Well, it's a significant amount, and it's why there are no actual paying jobs for law-abiding Americans, because these prison industrial corporations are making products with low labor costs, and ordinary businesses out here trying to hire ordinary Americans can't compete with it. And there's absolutely no restriction on it. And as far as the heroin, the street heroin coming in, that is all coming in from Afghanistan. As soon as the U.S. had kicked the Taliban out, the poppies were blooming. We have photos of coalition and U.S. soldiers protecting those opium poppy fields and handling the bags of raw opium. And when the U.S. government was questioned on that, they said, well, we have to let them grow opium or they won't have anything else to do. And that is absurd. What were they doing when the Taliban had eradicated opium production? They had to be doing something here. Now, obviously, they make more money by growing the opium, but that's not the same thing as saying that they're not going to have anything to do if they're not allowed to grow the opium. And where does the opium go? It's coming here to the United States. It's going into Russia. Russia's not happy about that at all. But if you look back, there is a long, long history of U.S. government involvement with drugs. You've probably all heard of the Skull and Bones fraternity at Yale University. Has a very dark reputation. Its official legal name is the Russell Trust. The Russell family fortune was made in the opium market, which back then was politely called the China trade, because they were growing opium. It was legal at the time. They grew opium here in the United States to sell to Britain. Britain sold it to China. And in fact, Britain actually fought a war with China over their right to sell opium to the Chinese people, which is where you get the popular image of the opium den in Chinese culture. We know that the CIA was bringing heroin back in from Vietnam inside the body bags of our dead kids. It was transshipped right through here in Hawaii because they didn't have any transports that could cross the Pacific Ocean in a single bound, even with aerial refueling, and it corrupted our local political structure, and we're still feeling the effects of that. We all know about that gun and drug running operation out of Arkansas in the 1980s, guns down, drugs back, cocaine to sell to our kids. Gary Webb did an expose of that called Dark Alliance. It's always, I mean, illegal drugs, first of all, they're kept illegal to make them more profitable, and then they're basically grabbed by the government as a non-traceable source of revenue for covert operation. And most Americans are still having a hard time getting their mind around the fact that the biggest drug smuggler in the country is the country. And the war on drugs is really just a war on the competition's drugs, because competition drives down prices and profits. Fast and Furious was selectively arming one cartel in Mexico, the Sinaloa cartel, in order to eliminate their competition so that more profit could be made on the drugs. It is that open and blatant. It's a repeat of the corruption that we saw during the prohibition of alcohol. The same exact patterns are repeating all over again. And the Bush and Clinton families are up to their necks in this.
Exactly. And, of course, the Anglo-American Empire was built on vice of all types from the time the colonies were established all the way through until now, you know, and you pointed out all the points exactly. And, of course, now SSRIs, you know, and that's massacring a bunch of people.
Those are really messing up people. But you're absolutely right. The reason there is a constant war on things like marijuana is because you can grow them in your backyard. Okay, if you want to get a buzz on, you go down to the bottle shop and you get a bottle of scotch on which you pay taxes and you fund some corporation, or you go to the tobacco shop and you get cigars and cigarettes on which you pay taxes and fund some corporation. They don't want you growing or making anything in your own home that you can enjoy, and they don't get a piece of it. Look back at the history of the Tennessee Whiskey Rebellion. This idea that, you can have alcohol and tobacco and these other intoxicants, but by golly, the government will control it and make a profit off of it. Even in these states that are decriminalizing marijuana, you still have to go to a state-sanctioned store to buy it. You're not allowed to grow it in your own home. And, of course, the current marijuana going around doesn't have any seeds in it anyway, which is very different from when I was a kid in college where you got seeds in your Pacololo, and you could grow them outside on the highway divider or something, which happened a lot.
Yes, and it should be pointed out that George Washington himself was a hemp grower, and the ropes for ships and everything else throughout the world were made out of it. You know, it's got many uses.
Well, okay, but you need to be very careful here because the hemp plant that makes really good rope makes really lousy smoke, and the hemp plant that is really good for smoking for enjoyment makes lousy rope. It's actually two different species of the same plant. And the reason for the war on hemp itself as a whole was to protect the profitability of the wood-based paper mills, because you can make great paper out of the hemp plant, but then that's a threat to the companies that cut down trees to make their paper with.
Hearst didn't like that very much. Well, anyway, have a Happy New Year, Mike, and thanks for taking my call.
All right, you got it. Thank you very much for the phone call. We're going to let you go. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. So let's talk a little bit about human-caused global warming. Insert ominous music here. As of yesterday, January 8th, 48 states have snow cover. The average temperature in the United States is 11 degrees. And still, the carbon Nazis are out there screaming, the Arctic is melting, the Arctic is melting, you've got to pay carbon taxes, you've got to obey a global environmental authority, you have to buy and sell carbon credits, we're going to make tons of money, but it's all in a good cause to save Mother Earth. The reality is right now in the Arctic, the sea ice today is just as thick as it was all the way back in 1940. See, the dodge here is, for the last several years, they're talking global warming, and every winter we get a record-setting winter. We're getting one now. It's a bad one coming in. So the global warming cultists are out there trying to say, well, the world is still warming, but the heat is somewhere you can't get to. It's hiding at the bottom of the ocean. Really? Ever hear of convection? Or it's someplace else on the world. It's up in the Arctic, and you'll just have to take our word for it because, after all, you can't actually go up to the Arctic yourself. Just trust us and our satellites and our graphs and everything like that. Then we had that scandal where the NOAA 16 satellite was over-reporting ground temperatures by 10 degrees. NOAA didn't discover that, or maybe they knew about it and weren't going to talk about it. It was ground observers who were pointing out what their instruments on the ground were showing was way much lower than what NOAA 16 was indicating. NOAA has been forced to remove that data from their servers, and yet the global warming cultists still refer to the NOAA 16 temp data as proof the world is warming. Now, if you've ever read my ClimateGate article, you will see that there's always a big hue and cry about the world is warming, it's all your fault, pushing some political agenda or another. Every once in a while, when everybody gets burned out on human-caused global warming, they'll be shouting warnings about a coming ice age. But our current crop of fraudsters and con artists are a little bit stuck because their agenda for global warming was to impose taxes on fossil fuels. Oh, you've got to stop using those fossil fuels. We're going to destroy those fossil fuel companies so the Rothschilds can buy them up for pennies on the dollar. And when the weather started turning cold, they very well couldn't say taxing carbon was going to stop that. If the weather's turning cold, you need more carbon in the atmosphere. If, in fact, carbon dioxide warms the atmosphere, which NASA now admits, no, actually, it doesn't. So what are we seeing around the world? I mean, in the southern hemisphere, where it's going into summer, they've got snow in New Zealand, Perth. Here in the United States, they're calling it snowpocalypse across the southern United States, into Florida, British Columbia, which normally is warmed by an air and ocean current called the Pineapple Express, which starts here in Hawaii and flows up there carrying warm air and tends to keep British Columbia and especially Vancouver warm and mild during the winter. Didn't work. Vancouver's now getting snow. So let's see, we're coldest winter in 20 years in Perth, longest cold spell since 1986 in British Columbia, record cold in Miami, Florida, and over in Europe they are having a miserable, miserable time. And so far that they know of, they're probably going to find more when the snows finally melt next summer. But so far, 23 people are known to have died freezing to death, including several refugees and homeless people. The refugees were sleeping rough, didn't have a shelter, and they didn't have enough emergency warming centers open. So people are literally freezing to death in the streets of Europe, and I'm sure a lot of those refugees from the much warmer Mideast are saying, whoa, we're going to go home. We can't deal with this thing. Switzerland, minus 41 degrees. Russia had their coldest Orthodox Christmas just a few days ago in the last 120 years. Poland temperatures 20 degrees below zero. 10 people died there. Belgium, one driver was killed when his truck slid off the highway. Italy, dozens of homeless people have died from the cold. And, let's see, skiers in Sarajevo remain there. The temperature dropped to minus 27 degrees. At that point, it's actually very dangerous to ski because of wind chill. We were reporting last week on how ski resorts that had opened in Montana, oh, it's an early season, we're going to have a great... They had to actually close the ski slopes because the wind chill was minus 40, which meant a skier starting at the top of the mountain and shushing down to the bottom would be dead and an ice cube by the time they got there. A lot of airports are whited out from the snow. A lot of roads are closed. A lot of dangerous driving conditions in Europe and here in the United States of America. Over in Connecticut, they had a multi-vehicle pileup involving 20 cars, 3 tractor trailers, and a tanker truck caused by the severe winter conditions and resulted in the closure of Interstate 91 in both directions. We're looking at a hard freeze warning in South Arkansas. They had one on Saturday, and they're saying it's going to be continuing. People in the Houston area had a hard freeze, and there was a rather interesting photo connected with that one because there's what's called the Wortham Fountain on Allen Parkway, which is this fountain with all these arms coming on out with spray heads, and it sort of creates this sphere shape of water. And they had to leave it running because the last thing you want to do when you have a hard freeze is stop the water from flowing through a pipe. Because when it turns to ice, it will expand and break your plumbing. And so if you are in an area, you always leave your outside faucets dribbling just a little tiny bit so the water and ice has some place to go. That's something that's very odd about water that you don't see in very many other substances. Normally, when something goes from liquid to solid state, it shrinks. In the case of ice, because of the way the ice crystals realign, it will expand. That's why ice floats on water. That's why the ice cubes are at the top of your soft drink. And so you have to protect your pipes. If you're in an area with a hard freeze, you've got to leave those outside water faucets, unless you've got insulated covers on them. You just leave them dribbling a little tiny bit. A few years ago, I saw this amazing photo of a garage in which were parked two fairly expensive cars. One was a Porsche, I forget the other one, but apparently the homeowner had forgotten about leaving the faucets on, and water pipes that were running across the top of the garage cracked. When it warmed up, the water started flowing, then it started freezing again, and both of these vehicles were just encased in solid ice. Freeze warnings issued in central Florida. So now we, of course, with all of that preface, we're looking now at the confirmation hearings next week for what is described as Trump's climate-denying cabinet. This is coming out of the Real News. Activists have labeled his cabinet the global warming denial cabinet. They're deniers. They're denying the world is warming. Next, we're going to hear them claim that Vladimir Putin hacked the climate. Just take our word for it. We don't have any proof, but we know better than you do because we're liberalologists. Now, here's an area that I think we need to pay attention to. As you know, fracking has been now officially acknowledged as increasing seismic activity in certain areas where it's being applied, especially around Oklahoma, which prior to the fracking boom had almost no seismic activity. Now, regularly, they're getting small earthquakes. We know that the quake that damaged the Washington Monument occurred in an area where fracking was going on. There is a risk there when you start pumping fluids into cracks in the ground. More about this when we come back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. We're talking about fracking, which is controversial in a number of areas, including contamination of groundwater, contamination of tap water, and it's a big stink issue because the fracking corporations don't want you to look at issues like that when they knock on your door and say, hey, we're going to harvest oil from your property, you're going to get insanely rich, and everything's going to be fine. And it turns out not to be the case. And a big part of the problem, of course, is that the oil companies, in order to maximize profits, are using very inexpensive piping. They're not putting it in sleeves. And we've seen videos of people in their homes turning on their water taps and able to light the water coming out of it on fire from the methane. And there have been several documentaries on this, all of them ignored by the corporate media. There was even a wonderful movie about the subject called Promised Land that is definitely worth catching if you can. So, we're talking about the link between fracking and seismic activity. It's been acknowledged and documented in Oklahoma, all over the West Coast. It's a big problem. And when this was first starting to happen, I pointed out that when you're over there in the eastern part of Oklahoma and fracking around that area, you're getting dangerously close to the new Madrid fault system. Now, for those of you who are unfamiliar with that, the single most powerful earthquake to ever hit the United States did not happen in Alaska, did not happen in California. It happened along that new Madrid fault. And when it did happen, it was still sparsely populated, so there wasn't a lot of damage. But reports are that for something like a day and a half afterwards, the Mississippi River was actually flowing the wrong way from the upsurge on the ground. Well, we posted a link to the automated seismic warning system showing that all of a sudden, small earthquakes are starting to happen along the new Madrid fault. If that were to let go with an equivalent quake to what hit there before, it would be a human and economic disaster. All right, we're going to take a phone call here. Francis in North Carolina, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, aloha, you.
Aloha, nui.
Back at you both. In line of the comment you made earlier about snow apocalypse or whatever it was in the southeast U.S., I'm guessing you're talking about down the road in the future or currently something about snow being in Florida.
They've got a freeze warning in Florida, and my guess is before this winter is over, we'll see snow up in the northern part of the state, down along the Panhandle.
Ah, okay, because, for one, not many people are aware of snow showing up further south than Augusta, Georgia, into Florida. That's basically unheard of.
Okay, Francis, stay on the line. I'm going to bring you back after we do our station identification. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Hour number 3. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Rented lips, 800-313-9443. We're going to go back to Francis in North Carolina. And we're talking about the absence of human-caused global warming. And we're seeing basically the same government and corporate media that told us Saddam Hussein had nuclear weapons is out there still insisting that the world is being warmed by human activity, even though you can't see it with your own eyes. And if you're a loyal American, you will just believe them when they say humans are warming the earth, and you will agree to pay a carbon tax and to allow a global environmental authority to tell you how to reduce your standard of living. And it's just more of the same nonsense by the control freaks and the money junkies. But as far as this winter, we're just getting into it. And already it's looking to be another record setter. And I wish to point out, earlier this year, the Old Farmer's Almanac did say winter would be late starting this year, but it's going to be brutal. And so far, the Old Farmer's Almanac seems to be correct. NASA, NOAA, the corporate media, and the government as a whole appear to be wrong.
Well, you look at those upper tier states in the U.S. Yeah, they're getting smacked down for certain.
They absolutely are. Somebody put up this time-lapse video where they got something like 14 inches of snow, and it wasn't the amount of snow, it was how quickly it built up. It was just vroom. It was just amazing there.
Well, that I can comprehend, because I know about a year or two ago when they had that one bizarre snow that blew in and basically creamed Atlanta, Georgia, and basically had people stranded on the interstates and all that. It was literally a nightmare for at least 12 hours, if not longer. They were stuck on there. The more bizarre part is that after they got a lot of the snow piled up into piles, it took months before that stuff ever actually melted.
Well, I remember when Boston had their snowpocalypse and they piled all that snow up, it didn't finish melting until late in summer.
Well, there you go. So it makes me, well, outside of the variance of temperature, depending on how scientific your train of thought is, which mine isn't, it would tend to lead to questions about, okay, what is the composition of the snow?
Well, the composition
and again, go ahead.
Okay, the composition of the snow as it comes from the sky is water. By the time it's plowed up and put into those piles, it also includes road salt, road debris, and can actually be very dark on the surface, which in theory should speed the melting along with the road salt. And it still took forever for it to go away. And we still have not yet had the lake effect storms. We're into January here. We've still got about 3-4 more months to get through before we can even begin to start thinking about a spring melt.
Actually, in the northern tier states, they're having their lake effect snow. Every time you look at the map, they're showing it. It's like, okay, they're getting another whatever dumping, as the case may be, depending on which state you're looking at. But yeah, they're already currently getting that.
Well, one of the problems that these states are dealing with, many of these states, some were a little smarter about it. But the reason they're not able to deal with the traffic problems and deal with the snow is the Al Gore and their people have been pushing human-caused global warming for so long, and this promise that snow was going to be lighter and lighter. Remember back in 2000, snowfalls were a thing of the past. 2009, Britain's going to have a snow-free winter. And local governments believed that nonsense and said, okay, well, our budgets are very tight, so here's some place we can trim. We don't need to buy as many snowplows. We don't need to keep as many snowplows maintained. We can let some of them go. We don't need to stockpile as much road grit and road salt. And then when the hard winter hits, they're not prepared to deal with it.
Well, there's that. I think the one thing got me with Gore and his family and so forth ad nauseum was the aspect of preaching this global climate change, shifting, warming, whatever you want to call it, for that matter, give it a name, to the point that one of my nieces say, well, who called the light in the room? And I says, ask your uncle. Maybe he did. I don't know. I didn't do it. And so, well, it needs to be turned off. I said, then it started talking about the global warming thing, and I thought, my dear, when you go and tell Al Gore to shut off every room, house, whether it's a mansion or not, then I'll believe in it. But until he shuts off every light in this place, regardless of how big it is, then he might as well just shut it.
You know, you're absolutely right about that. And, you know, he went out to California and bought himself an oceanside mansion. So much for the screaming about rising sea levels. But it's a gigantic fraud. Like so many other things, we're told it's a fraud. And now they're wringing their hands. Why don't you believe us? We have people in white laboratory coats telling you what to think. And we've been lied to by the people in the white lab coats, just like we're lied to by people in three-piece suits, like we've been lied to by people in priests' robes as well. And I think Zbigniew Brzezinski was right. We're in the middle of a global awakening of the people. Of course, from his point of view, that's a bad thing. They want us all to go back to sleep and be told what to think and what to believe. But with each new exposure of fraud, confidence in literally civilization itself is starting to erode because everybody is starting to realize that the government and the media and the bankers and the pharmaceutical corporations, they're all about harvesting wealth from the people, and there's no concern about whether this is actually beneficial or indeed harmful to the public as a whole. As long as the money is pouring on in, everything is permitted, and that, by the way, is life under a fascist economic dictatorship.
Wow, that's one way of nailing it.
Okay?
Well, that's the reason why when I see someone with an outfit or uniform of some sort on, I tend to question them up and down every which way but loose. Have a good one. All
right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go here. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. And by the way, when you see somebody with a uniform or a badge or whatever trying to tell you what to think, you should be skeptical. A skeptical people is a free people. And we are fighting for our freedom against a prison made out of lies, fraud, and deception. Now then, apparently up in Milwaukee, there was a woman who froze to death in her home, and apparently this woman had not paid her rent in 3 months, and her heating, electricity had been turned off. It turned out this woman was an Army veteran. But we got plenty of money to send to Israel, but not enough to take care of our veterans. We'll just let them freeze to death. All right, we're going to take another phone call. Terry in Oregon, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Mike. Just one point. The carbon footprint of this country is going to go down whether we like it or not. As soon as this economy crashes, the dollar's worthless. And as a result of the dollar not being the reserve currency of the world anymore, we're going to go back to how far? 100 years ago, Mike?
It could, but you know something? Re-ruralization of America, I think, would actually help build up that infrastructure that's outside the major cities. I mean, have you noticed that the government will take money from everybody, but they're only pouring it into certain very narrow places? We have that here on the island of Oahu, where all of the money for keeping everything repaired and looking good goes into those tourist meccas. Waikiki, Ka'anapali, those areas. They're built up and maintained, and the rest of the island is in terrible shape. We officially, according to the U.S. Department of Transportation, have the worst roads in the entire country outside of those tourist areas. And as a matter of fact, somebody at the University of Hawaii actually did a calculation and estimated that every driver who lives here on Oahu is paying an average of $700 per year for damage caused by the poor condition of the roads. Either tailpipes and mufflers that are scraped off, shocks wearing out, springs breaking, and I've suffered car damage from the roads, and of course all the road tear up for the building of our light rail system has actually made the situation quite worse.
Yeah, exactly. That's why this dollar is so uncertain. My money's going in 3 places. Number one, Bitcoin, and I know that's a gamble. Number two, silver coins. And number three, BitGold, which merged with gold money. Those three places. As soon as my check comes in, I get it out of the bank because the banks are very shaky, and I put it into one of those three things.
Well, I think anything that is a commodity that can be a store of value is definitely good to have, as long as it's under your own control. One of the problems that you need to be aware of for some of these metals investment companies is they take your money and then insist your gold or silver is stored safely in their vaults, but in point of fact, they're running it as a fractional reserve system, and there isn't, in fact, enough gold in that vault to cover all the paper contracts that are out there. In fact, the last estimate I heard is it's leveraged literally hundreds to one. So if you're going to invest in silver and gold, and I recommend it highly, purchased in small amounts so there's less of a record, but it's something that you can bring home and hide between your mattresses or something like that, because even your bank safety deposit box is no longer safe.
Yeah, that's why I invest in silver coins, but as far as gold, I got into BitGold, which merged with gold money, and they say that Brinks, has got a reputation around the world, has these vaults around the world, and they certify that gold is in there.
Call me a cynic, but I mean all those all those corporations that took part in the 2008 mortgage-backed security fraud were all supposed to be reputable, trustworthy businesses as well. I mean, finance isn't really a science. It's run as a religion. It depends on the belief and faith of the ordinary people. Same thing with the government. They run the government like a religion. You must believe us. Forget what your eyes and ears and senses are telling you. You will believe in the most holy revealed dogma of whatever agenda it is they're selling this week.
Okay, what's your opinion of Bitcoin?
I have not gotten into it. I understand it's doing very well, but as you say, it is a gamble. And if I had any surplus investment cash, I'll usually buy gold coins. Unfortunately, I discovered too late that they really lose their value after you eat that chocolate bit out of the middle. So don't do that. Okay?
I heard that silver coins, I buy silver eagles, and I heard they're a lot better investment than gold because the gold-silver ratio is expanded so much, it's got to come back. And what about all this gold they have down in the Grand Canyon? Have you heard about that?
I heard something about it, but I seem to recall when I looked at it that it seemed to be more of a kind of a myth or a fantasy. You're talking about a gold vault or just gold that's in the Colorado River? Because there's always gold in, that you can pan out. In fact,
that's in the Grand Canyon Mountains and also the Chocolate Mountains in Arizona. Supposedly, that there's so much gold there that, I don't know how accurate this story is, but that's why Wilson signed the Federal Reserve Act, because they realized if all this gold came out, it would destroy the money. Now,
I find that very hard to believe, because if you have a gold-based money and you've got more gold, then you've got more real, dependable money. So I'll tell you what, I'll take a look into it. But there is still a lot of gold on out there, and as the economy tightens up, it actually becomes profitable to go on out and start mining again. And a lot of people are actually doing that. When I lived in Southern California, up in the mountains at an area called East Fork, there's the remains of a gold camp from the 1930s Depression that was built on the remains of a gold camp from the gold rush. You can still see artifacts and foundations there. And we used to pan gold, recreational. We never got a huge amount, but some of the gold that I panned on out is actually in Claire's wedding ring.
Yeah. I understand that
because I'm cheap.
Quantity of silver, the quantity of silver is much less than the quantity of gold, and that's why the silver prices are so much undervalued today. Is that true?
Well, we know that both silver and gold prices are being manipulated, and so
right.
I think if there really was gold in the Grand Canyon Mountains or whatever, they'd be digging it out right now to cover the shortfall at the New York Federal Reserve and Fort Knox, which are pretending to have much more gold than they actually do. And so I would imagine if there really was some kind of a major gold strike to be had out there, it would be being mined right now, this moment.
Well, it's not, because the gold price is kept low through manipulation, like you say.
It doesn't matter. The price. No, the price. You're not listening. The price doesn't matter. The New York Federal Reserve and Fort Knox are in a serious bind because on paper they have X amount of gold, but it's not really there. They've been leasing it out the back doors or using it for other things. And now you have all these other countries around the world demanding repatriation of their gold from the New York Federal Reserve, and the New York Federal Reserve is stalling and stalling and stalling. If there was a source for new pure gold, they'd be mining it right now in order to make good on all of the other people's gold that they mishandled. So I would tend to view that story with a little bit of skepticism, okay?
Right, Mike, but don't the mining companies have to pay their bills in U.S. dollars to be able to run a mining operation?
Well,
and if the gold they get out that doesn't translate to U.S. dollars, they can't operate.
Well, that's a regular private mining corporation, but I think, again, you're looking at a crisis of confidence in the American banking system as a whole that would be triggered by a gold run on the New York Fed. And for that reason, I would expect to see the government itself out there trying to mine the gold if it was really there. So at this point, I'm very suspicious of that story. And again, it's hard to imply what's going on in terms of the ratios between silver and gold because of all the rigging that has been going on.
Right, but the rigging is to keep the price down to keep the dollar value up. Is that right?
Well, the rigging, that's part of the reason. The other reason to keep gold and silver prices down is, first of all, to make it more affordable for the New York Federal Reserve to buy real gold to make good on all of those repatriation claims. The other part, of course, is if silver and gold were to really take off, most people would close those negative interest savings accounts they have at the banks and get into metals, or they might empty their stock portfolio and get into the metals. And so the paper markets are being propped up and kept alive through sabotaging the gold and silver markets.
And they do it by buying these naked puts on the gold futures market, right?
Well, they do it by a couple of different ways. For one thing, the London Gold Fix combines the paper gold contracts with the physical to come up with that supply and demand, what is the price going to be. The problem is they're overprinting those gold contracts and selling them like crazy. They're leveraged hundreds to one, which means that for every 1 real ounce of deliverable gold in the vault, these companies have sold like 1 to 200 paper contracts for that same ounce. Obviously, they cannot be made good on. But the London Fix will take those contracts along with the physical, blend them together, and say, this is the gold price. And it's dishonest because they're diluting the price of real gold with all this fake paper gold.
Exactly. And if there was no manipulation, don't you agree that the price of gold will be way up from where it is now?
Absolutely agree. Absolutely agree.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Mike, appreciate your conversation, and we'll talk to you some other time.
All right, thanks an awful lot for the phone call. And a reminder, don't eat the chocolate bit out of the middle, or the gold coin loses all of its resale value. All righty, so we're going to let Terry go there. And let's see, we're coming up on a commercial break. Let's talk about science and health. As you know, GMO is becoming a serious concern to the American people. First and foremost, because we are seeing this very clear program to get us to buy and consume GMO crops without even being allowed to know that's what we're doing. Now, Monsanto is one of the primary movers behind the genetically modified crops. Everybody relies on Monsanto's claim to have proven GMO corn and Roundup pesticide glyphosate are perfectly safe. There is just cause to doubt that. When we come back from this commercial break, we'll elucidate further, and feel free to join us on the line, 800-313-9443. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show, and we're talking about GMO foods. And the claim that GMO foods are safe and that glyphosate is safe is based on a 90-day study that was done by Monsanto, where they took some rats and they fed them GMO corn, and GMO corn sprayed with glyphosate, and at the end of 90 days, the rats looked okay. And so Monsanto ended the study at that point, destroyed the rats, and released a report saying, we found the stuff is safe, no harm whatsoever. And the corporate media, the same corporate media that told you Saddam had weapons of mass destruction, Assad had sarin gas, the same corporate media that assures you human activity is warming the world and you shouldn't pay any attention to all that snow and ice and everything, that corporate media parroted Monsanto's propaganda to all of you to convince you GMO was safe. Now, as you know, some years ago, there was another study done in France where the rats were raised for their entire lifespan. They didn't just cut it off at 3 months. And what those researchers found is starting at month number 4, just after where Monsanto cut their studies off, the rats started showing serious medical problems, massive tumors, impaired reproductive function, shortened lifespan. And this report came on out, was immediately denounced by the corporate media. Oh, they've got to be fakes and frauds. A former Monsanto executive somehow managed to get into the management of this publication that had published the study and get it yanked. Now, it's now been republished in other scientific journals and ignored. But more and more people are looking at this. And over at Investment Watch blog, they're talking about this new peer-reviewed study that shows GM food causes profound damage to the body. And this is all focused on a study that came on out, was done by Ibrahim and Okasha, entitled Effect of Genetically Modified Corn on the Jejunal Mucosa of Adult Male Albino Rat. It was published in the journal Experimental and Toxicological Pathology. And what it showed was that these rats who were fed on GM BT corn, MON 810, for 90 days, suffered serious damage to the small intestine. See, the problem here is not the altered DNA itself. The problem here is in protein expression. Because the way it works inside the cell of an organism is you have that DNA at the core of it, and then there's an RNA molecule that acts as a messenger that sort of cozies up to the correct section in the DNA, and it picks up information, then it swims on out to the cell itself to direct the formation of proteins. Now, if the DNA is altered and artificial, the proteins may not be exactly what nature would produce. But to the body, those receptor sites are going to recognize those malformed proteins and try and bring them into the receptors, but they may not fit perfectly. And out of that malfit, you start getting odd behavior from the protein that leads to some complications. So basically, at the point in time where Monsanto said this stuff is all safe, this other peer-reviewed report has now come on out and said there is damage to the small intestine. Now, if your small intestine is damaged, you can't properly metabolize food, can you? So this is further confirmation. They're playing with the code of life. DNA modification is the most dangerous technology man has ever fooled around with. Far worse than nuclear power, because they are playing with the code of life. And we know just from our experience with Windows machines how sloppy some of these software people can be. And it is a major, major problem. Because we live in a country where as long as something is making money, it's okay in the eyes of the government. More commerce, more sales, more taxes. That's it. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're talking about GMO. We're talking about yet another peer-reviewed study coming on out and saying this stuff is causing harm. It's damaging the bodies of anybody who is eating this stuff. And, of course, GMO is being pushed all over the world. And people who are concerned in the United States about it are being told, you're not allowed to know what's in your food. You have no right to know if the food you are eating is natural or something that came out of a laboratory with possibly harmful consequences. Why don't you just believe us when we tell you it's good for you? Now, China, which does not have the world's best reputation for the safety of its various products, has now banned GMO crops for 5 years. Their largest grain-producing province in China has set 5-year ban on genetically modified crops. They don't want the stuff. It's banned from being imported into China as well, and it's caused a huge amount of damage for American organic farmers who have been shipping corn and wheat to China, and it gets there, the Chinese test it, and discover these organic farmers' crops have been contaminated by pollen from GMO test fields, in some cases from states away. They cannot control it. All right, we're going to take a phone call. Sherry in Texas, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. That's depressing to hear. The Chinese should start feeling better then, because I suffered for, I guess it was 2 to 3 years with this uncomfortable heaviness in my gut. And that's right next to where my heart is. And sometimes I thought it was a heart problem. No one seemed to know what it was. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't fall asleep. It took a couple hours before I could fall asleep. And I couldn't get any relief, you know. And so I received a non-GMO shopping guide from a friend. And I changed my diet, and the problem went away. It's like she gave me my life back by sending me this little book.
Yeah.
What's the guy's name? Stephen, is it F. Smith, or I can't remember his middle initial, but anyway, he wrote it, and he's a big advocate of changing your diet. So again, I say I know what I experienced. This was my suffering for years, and it's like I am not supposed to be sick. I couldn't take these corporate drugs. I'm small-boned. I'm not a heavy person. I feel things very acutely, so I didn't want to go on the Fosamax or things that are supposed to be for your, I guess that's supposed to be for your bones. I don't know. But anyway, I've heard of people taking these antacids, and that causes more problems.
Yeah, it does.
And I didn't want to go the corporate route.
Well, you know, Claire and I went through that with her joint pain and formaldehyde precursors in low-end cosmetics and cleaning chemicals. I've learned how to avoid MSG, which is a migraine trigger. I've learned to keep myself alkaline, which helps me avoid gout, which I used to suffer from tremendously. But again, we live in a country where, from the point of view of the government, anything is permitted as long as it's generating revenues and tax opportunities. And it really is it's alarming how much that is in the stores is actually bad for you, whether it's aspartame, monosodium glutamate, these synthetic growth hormones that are in the meat and the poultry. Now we're finding out that Splenda, the artificial sweetener, suppresses thyroid function and actually makes you gain weight. What is Splenda sold as? Oh, it's a diet aid. It's going to help you lose weight. No, quite the opposite. It suppresses the thyroid function. And carrageenan, which is a common thickening agent in dairy products, causes irritable bowel syndrome. What do they want to do to deal with that? Oh, sell you a medicine for irritable bowel syndrome. They don't tell you stop ingesting these synthetic compounds. Another one is gelin gum, is another thickening agent put into dairy products. That also causes intestinal upset. Where we're being just dumped on with all of these toxic chemicals and then told that we're crazies if we want to have food that doesn't have all these chemicals in them.
But we know how we feel.
Yes.
And no one can do one better than nature, and all needs to be in perfect order. If it's not in perfect order according to nature, we're going to suffer. That's all. You can't have Dow Chemical and 3M and Monsanto doing one better. It just doesn't work.
It doesn't work.
To our bodies.
That's exactly
that's
right. It gets back to something I've said before about coevolution. When you are out there eating natural, organic corn or wheat or fruits or whatever, you are basically dealing with biochemistry that has co-evolved along with us for millions of years. No surprises there. These synthetic molecules are something our bodies have never encountered before, and they don't know what to do with them, and that's what's provoking these toxic responses. But as you know, the idea of the corporation is, you know, you can't grow your own food, we'll grow it, and then we'll process it to make it more valuable and raise its resale price. And again, all these government agencies that we're told are supposed to be looking out for our welfare, they're looking the other way, whether it's the FDA, the USDA. They're there to support the corporations in pulling off this selling of crud to us by reassuring us, we're the government. This stuff's good for you. It's not going to hurt you. Absolutely, you can eat this. And then we find out the reasons we're getting sick are being found on our supermarket shopping shelves.
You can sure feel the difference. That's all I can say. And I'm glad other countries are on to it, because then we'll win out with mass, awakenings all over the world, and they don't stand a chance.
Well, there's a complicating issue. There's a complicating issue between radioactive disasters like Chernobyl, 3 Mile Island, Fukushima, Hanford, the oil disasters in places like the Gulf of Mexico. There literally is not enough safe, natural, healthy food for the entire human population.
Yeah.
So we're entering the world that was depicted in the movie Soylent Green, where there's either the synthetic factory-produced stuff or you don't eat at all. And that's a very, very scary situation, because once Monsanto has a monopoly on all food production, what are they going to do? Maximize profits. How are they going to do that? Cut the quality.
Yeah, well, I grow my own, and that can be a challenge, too, in this weather.
Yes, it can be.
I'm glad I have a place where I can do that and visit the farmers markets and do the best you can, and maybe we can partner with Russia, because they're big on this.
Yeah, they're very big on the Russia's GMO free, and already the world's markets are going to buy food from Russia because they know it's GMO free. If they buy anything from the United States, it's GMO. They've got no right to know. They don't want to buy it. That was a big part of the Trans-Pacific Partnership and the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership, to arm twist these countries to continue to buy U.S. agricultural products, even though GMO is already banned in many of those countries. And it failed miserably. And so Monsanto's answer is, well, if we can't dump this stuff on the rest of the world, at least we can make money feeding it to the American people, as long as we have laws that make it impossible for them to know what it is they're putting in their mouth.
Well, it hasn't worked. I know what I'm putting in my mouth, and it made me feel miserable, and that's the only way I got relief, is to get this non-GMO shopping guide, and I just changed it. And it's a little more expensive, but you can get creative. You can. I prep in the morning for what I'm going to have that night, and I have to take more time for my cooking. But boy, it's worth it.
Yeah, it really is. It really is. You are what you eat, and you should treat your body like a temple. Yeah. And certainly, since I started avoiding some of these chemicals that are supposed to be good for weight loss, like aspartame and so forth, is a big reason I've been able to lose as much weight as I have, because I haven't had the time to increase my exercise regimen. But I've lost over 60 pounds since I began this weight loss program. I'm aiming for 180. And a big part of it is avoiding MSG, which makes you want to eat more, avoiding aspartame, which makes you crave carbohydrates. And again, we need to avoid Splenda, because that's suppressing your thyroid's function.
You can save the aspartame to kill ants in your garden. It's good for that.
Yeah, it was actually at one time classed as a neurotoxic biological weapon. But hey, we can make money selling it to the American people, so there we go.
Well, thank you, Mike.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go here. Now then, Viagra. Yes, we all know about that little blue pill. And men have been taking it for quite some time to do you-know-what with. Well, apparently there is now a big problem. And I twigged on this because I was watching TV the other night, and one of those ambulance chaser lawyer commercials came on saying, were you taking Viagra and did you get this? You have a right to sue. And apparently a 2014 study found out that Viagra doubles men's risk of melanoma, a fatal skin cancer. Once you get a melanoma, it just spreads and spreads and spreads and eats you alive. And apparently Viagra doubles your chances of getting that. I've been saying all along, porn is cheaper and no side effects. And now I'm standing vindicated on that one. Now, speaking of Viagra and various other things, you're going to love this story. This is just bizarre. It's from Information Liberation. Apparently, Germany's Greens Party is being both praised and criticized for suggesting that sex services provided by prostitutes for people struggling with severe health conditions should be paid for by the government. In other words, if you're dealing with a serious medical crisis and you're depressed and your doctor thinks getting laid is going to make you feel a little bit better, the government should pay for it. Now, I will grant you that getting laid is going to improve anybody's outlook on the world, but I think getting the taxpayers to cover this, I think the taxpayers would rather save the money for their own prostitutes. But, I mean, it's another example of Greens just getting completely out of control, and this liberalism that everything is managed and controlled by the government, which, by the way, was also the same model in the former Soviet Union. Everything had to be controlled by that central government. Nobody was allowed any freedom or autonomy, which led to disasters like Lysenkoism, which triggered the great famines in the Soviet Union, where the Soviet Union had to buy grain from the United States. Because, contrary to the belief system in the world's capitals, politics cannot overturn scientific reality, no matter what. Now, Trump has had his meeting with intelligence officials regarding the possibility of Russian interference in the election. He called the meeting constructive and said that the conclusion of everybody at the meeting was hacking by Russia or anybody else had absolutely no effect on the election, which completely contradicts the statement issued earlier today by Reince Priebus, who is supposed to be the incoming White House Chief of Staff. And frankly, at this point, if I were Donald Trump, I'd be firing him right now for undermining Trump like that. Now, I think Trump made Priebus the White House Chief of Staff. It's the most powerful position in the White House, second to the president. And I think he did that because Trump was trying to mend bridges and offer an olive branch of peace to the GOP because he knows he's going to need them in 4 years. And Priebus basically just tried to stab him in the back. And I think that is grounds for termination right there. Now then, let's talk a little bit about computing. There's another Android banking Trojan malware, disguises itself as Super Mario Run. And apparently this is a new Nintendo game. It's wildly popular. And apparently they're setting up sites claiming that you can get working versions from third-party websites. And, of course, that's always a disaster. When you go anywhere, third-party, to get materials of any kind, you're going to get hit by malware. One of the weirdest things that I have seen lately is, as you know, the Lady Claire is choir director for her church choir, and I'm her roadie. I support her. And every once in a while we have to hunt down a piece of music on the Internet. And you would be surprised how many times I've gone to these websites that purport to be libraries, archives of Christian music, and I'll click a link and all the security on my computer lights up saying, oh, they're trying to plant malware on you. Is nothing sacred. Speaking of which, apparently ransomware authors are now targeting British schools and charging payments of up to £8,000 to unlock data that they've encrypted. And apparently the fraudsters are cold calling schools claiming to be from the Department of Education and asking for the head teacher's email addresses. Then they send them booby-trapped attachments saying, this is from the Department of Education, please unzip and look at this. Boom. Their entire school computer system is ransomware. Where's the government in all of this? Or is Great Britain now falling into the practice of using ransomware to pillage and plunder their own people? Because they, too, are hopelessly in debt. Now, up in Northern California, federal prosecutors want a judge to order a Northern California blogger to remove all information from his website about undercover informants involved in the takeover of the National Wildlife Refuge in Oregon last winter. Apparently, there were undercover informants who were moving things along, And Assistant U.S. Attorney Pamela Halsinger is saying public dissemination of the material produced could threaten ongoing investigations and the safety of government confidential human sources. In other words, they're out there screaming, save our snitches, save our snitches, save our snitches. Now, maybe it's because I grew up watching too many movies about the Nazis, and I went through COINTELPRO in the 1960s, but to me, an informant is a bad guy. They're a snitch. They're there to do dirty things. And if you, again, look at COINTELPRO, those undercover informants weren't just spying. They were goading people to commit illegal attacks so that they could be arrested and thrown in prison. So, no, I'm not of a mind to protect confidential informants here. Meanwhile, apparently, this, according to a story coming out of governmentslaves.info, the FBI is now paying Geek Squad technicians to search computers that are in for repairs looking for evidence of criminal activity. So if you have to take your computer to Geek Squad, and right now that's the only place still available for computer repairs on this rock, run an eraser first to erase the unused area on the hard disk first. Eraser is a free utility. You can download it. I've tested it out and verified it actually does do what it claims to do. And just make sure there's nothing on there, because now the Geek Squad people are being paid to be snitches on you. Everybody, be a snitch for Uncle Sam. It's your patriotic duty to rat out your friends and family and customers. We'll be right back after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. Last segment of our program today, and somebody just wrote on in asking if photo labs tell on customers who have film developed. What's film? What's a photo lab? I'm joshing, of course. When I was a kid, I actually dated one of the girls who worked in those little photomat booths, those little kiosks that were in the driveways, the parking lots of the shopping centers and everything. And I don't know if they ever reported on the police, but they definitely looked at your pictures. So you had to be careful. Why do you think the Polaroid was so popular when it first came on out? All righty. Now then, interestingly, up in Silicon Valley, there's a company, Timeshare, CMO, and its CEO is Melinda Byerly, and she apparently posted on Facebook that middle America is violent, racist, and an S-blank hole. So we're seeing that, if anything, the defeat of Hillary Clinton has resulted in liberals just becoming more extreme in their absolute, unshakable faith that they are the intellectual superiors to everybody else. And it's a bit of a lie. Now, back in the 60s and 70s, liberals really did represent the intellectual elites. But it became a badge of fashion, a marketing device. People who weren't sure about their IQs, or people who weren't sure they were going to pass their final exams, they would just put the label liberal on themselves. I'm a liberal, therefore I'm automatically by default intellectually superior. And we find that many of these people are, in fact, not intellectually superior. If anything, they're arrogant in their ignorance. Claire and I had that experience with a friend of ours we've known for a lot of years. But she's a hardcore liberal, and her attitude is that if she doesn't know some missions, bringing more business to United Launch Alliance, which also involves SpaceX and Boeing, to take astronauts to the International Space Station. And I think it's a sign that we're actually going to see NASA get back into the space business, as opposed to the, we're here to prove to you all that Al Gore was right about human-caused global warming. By the way, we're on the tail end of the quadranted meteor shower. Now, the peak was supposedly a few days ago, but you might still see a meteor out there toward the extreme northern part of the sky. Apparently, astronomers have discovered a mysterious ring-shaped galaxy, 359 million light years away, and I'm sure all the Ring World fans are saying, we found it! We found Larry Niven's Ring World. Which is, by the way, a great science fiction book if you want to read that. There's the music. Time for me to get on out of here. Do Jim Goddard's show up there in Vancouver. We'll be back tomorrow, Tuesday, here on the Republic Broadcasting Network. Until then, you are all part of the independent media. Take what you learn here, share it with everyone, post it everywhere, social media. We've got to keep up the pressure. We're winning the war against the real authors of the fake news, the corporate media. We'll be back tomorrow. Aloha, America.